You are in for an interesting ride.
Welcome to just a short snippet of an ET Newsroom segment. It is the 27th of December 2024, just before we roll into 2025, and by all accounts the astrology says it's going to be an amazing year for the truth to come out and for there to be a lot of changes on the finance side. So watch this space. Well, I'm sure we will. What with the drones and all. Isn't it interesting what our governments are getting up to? Like they don't know what the drones are, right? Are they drones? Yeah, who knows? Anyway, 2025 is going to be amazing. Just to wish you all very happy new year, and just to thank those who have followed my work. I don't know how much I'll be doing in the same vein. It's not got where I would like to. We'll see what 2025 brings. I am going to be focusing on Eklectia specifically, along with some other projects. And that brings me to one of our eclectarians, and that is Steve Boucher. Steve Boucher has had the most incredible encounters and experiences. He actually had pre-birth memories. He remembers standing with another intelligence and really putting up a bit of an argument about coming back down to Earth.
Yeah, I had some pre-birth experiences. I've had quite a few experiences actually in my youth up till about 1976 or so. The pre-birth experience was the first one that I actually remembered consciously without hypnosis. I was in between drafting jobs. I'm a draftsman. I was working at a hardware store in between drafting jobs. When lunchtime came along, I'd go out and sit in my van and eat my lunch out there. I was reading a book called the Nag Hammadi Library. So I haven't been able to find the part that I was reading since, but it was something to do with a high place and being able to see the earth out in space hanging there like a big beach ball. And when I read that, something clicked in my mind and I got a flood of memories just came in all of a sudden that I know this place. There's something familiar about this, you know. I remembered being in a place, a high place, where I could see all the kingdoms of the earth. And the earth looked like a big beach ball hanging in space. From the vantage point I could see it from, I assumed that I must have been standing on a crater on the moon. And next to me was a gray being that I knew well and respected him. He was like, he had some kind of authority, like the way we would look at a soldier or a police officer. He was a gray being. He looked like this. He was telling me that I had to go down to Earth, and I was looking at it, and I really didn't want to go down there. What occurred to me after I had these pre-birth memories was that this high place reminded me an awful lot of the high place in the Bible where the devil took Jesus to and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth and said, if you do an act of worship to me, I will give you this. So that's what it reminded me of. And I think maybe I might have been standing in the same place. The being was telling me I had to go down there. I didn't want to go. I was afraid of it. It had been decreed by the council. And I didn't know who this council was, just knew that they had some great authority. He told me that I had to go down there. He said, why are you so afraid of going down to Earth? And I said, because I've heard so many horrible things about that place. I just don't want to go down there. When I remembered saying that to him, I realized that this must be my first incarnation on Earth and hopefully the last. He kept trying to convince me and I kept raising objections. And so finally he said, there is a person here that has just returned from an incarnation on Earth. Maybe if you talk to him, he can alleviate some of your fears. He said, would you like to talk to him? And I said, okay. And almost immediately I found myself standing in the doorway of a small room. And there was this guy sitting in a chair in the middle of the room. And he looked kind of dejected. I walked up to him and I said, I understand that you just came back from a life on Earth. What was it like? I said, was it good or was it bad? And he said, well, it was kind of both. And I said, well, was it more good than bad or more bad than good? And he said, well, it's difficult to say. And I said, well, if you had to go down there again, would you go? And he said, well, that's the problem. He said, I have to go. And I said, why? And he said, because I didn't complete my mission. And at that point, I realized he had taken his own life. So, that made me feel very uneasy. Suddenly, I was back on this ridge with this being. I call him Rigel. He said, did you talk to him? And I said, yes. And he said, did he alleviate your fears at all? And I said, no, it actually made me more afraid to go. He said, you have to go down because it's been decreed. And if you don't go there, they could send you somewhere much worse. I took that as a personal threat, and I felt like I had no free will to say no.
And, once he was down here, all kinds of things manifested in his life. And one of them involved Sasquatch. I mean, how amazing is that? An abduction experience with a friend, and Sasquatch was involved. I know, it's wild, isn't it?
So we walked through Short Hills Park on this hike. We were walking up the hill toward the top of this ridge. And when I came over the top, I saw there was this familiar saucer-shaped craft sitting directly on our path. So my friend and I were kind of shocked to see this. And for some reason, I said, I want to get a closer look. And he said, I don't think we should. I think we should get out of here right now. I noticed that the hatch was open on the side of it. I just kind of peeked in the hatch and I couldn't see anything in there. Couldn't see anybody inside or anything. So I went up the steps into it and there was nobody in there. There was just some control panels and seats, pretty big, bigger inside than it did from the outside. One thing unusual that I found, there was a big, huge chair in the ship. There was a huge chair. And I wondered, what is this big chair for? And then I heard my friend yell from outside, they're coming, come on, quick, we got to get out of here. So I ran down the steps and I looked behind my friend. There was 4 of these gray beings and they were heading towards us. So we ran down the bank through the trees and we got to the field and I glanced behind me and I could see the 4 beings standing at the top of the ridge and they were pointing something at us. So I started zigzagging and we were running for our lives. Pretty much. And then I felt something hit me in the back. All my muscles seized up and I fell. And I was laying in this tall grass. And the same thing happened to my friend. I could see him from where I was, but all I could move was my eyes. We were laying there on the ground, both kind of paralyzed, and hear branches breaking and something that sounded like loud footsteps heading toward me. But all I could see was this foot, and it was like a big hairy foot. And I felt this thing reach down and it grabbed me and it picked me up from the waist and it grabbed my friend and picked him up from the waist. And he had one of us in each of his arms and he started walking up the bank. And at that point, I realized that this was what they would call a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, It brought us up to the top of the bank and dropped us on the ground, and the beings took over from there. And they brought us into the ship, and this Bigfoot thing followed them up the stairs into the craft, and they brought it over to this big, huge chair and sat it down. And I realized then what that chair was for. They were using this creature as kind of like a beast of burden. I could tell that it was intelligent, but I didn't know if it was voluntarily helping these beings. So I was very afraid of this Sasquatch thing. It was extremely intimidating because of its size, and at least 8 or 9 feet high. All this hair on it. Kind of freaked out, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. I was so intimidated by its size, and it was staring at me just as I was staring at it. It was completely still, sitting in this chair. I think they had some wires going to it or going to the chair, but it just sat there staring at me, and I was staring at it. And one of the gray aliens came over to me and he said, "Stop staring at him. You're making him nervous." I found that kind of funny, but it sort of broke the ice, you know.
He was a musician. One of Steve's talents is that he's also a very fine artist, illustrator. And I had occasion to reach out to Steve recently and found that he health-wise was not doing so well. And this is what I want to share. And he said it was all right for me to share. So Steve is currently in a hospice. You know, I did some volunteering at a hospice many moons ago. I'd been speaking to this wonderful Italian lady one day, and one of the drivers who helped pick up charity donations and that sort of thing for the hospice said, "Oh, let me show you around." And as he was showing me around the hospice, I'd only seen the reception area and the ward. This room was just full of these tall cabinet looking pieces of furniture. And he opened one and pulled out a drawer. And there was this wonderful Italian lady I'd been speaking to not a few days earlier. I was in such shock. I hadn't known she died. Seeing my discombobulation, he said, "Oh, look at that," and pointed to a notice on the bottom of the inside of the door. Push to open. He said, "Now, who's going to be doing that from in there?" I just said, "Steve, would it be okay for me to mention to people your situation, because Steve has a lot of friends out in the community, UFO, ET and otherwise, and I thought they'd want to know. I thought you'd want to know." He said, yes, you can tell them. So I'm just going to read to you what Steve told me. He's probably been in the hospice just over a week and a half or so, and he just says, "I have stage 4 metastatic cancer and I'm dying. It's in my colon, my lungs, and now my bones." He also has a vertebrae fracture, poor thing. But his pain is being managed with morphine, and he's got a pain button pump there. So just to let you know that one of our fellow Eklectians is in the hospice.
Gazing out the window, the snow gently settles on the trees outside. But here in our cabin, we're both.
So, be kind to yourselves. I hope 2025 is going to be a year when your dreams come true, and look after yourselves. So, happy 2025. Steve. All right, everybody. Over and out from ET Newsroom.
The smile